All right, let's pray. Lord, it's a glorious morning. Thank you for the world that you have created, for putting each one of us in this moment in time for your own great purposes. And I'm grateful for the scriptures, very grateful for the people who populate the pages of scripture, whose witness comes to us today. We're grateful for the Apostle Paul, and I pray that you would help us to be attentive to his experience in life, that it may become part of our experience as well. And I ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty worried about the drought, at least at our place, which is an hour and 15 minutes north of here. We have the little lake that we're on. There's just sort of an island drought. You've gotten rain here. People have had rain all around us, but not at our place where our lake is down about 2 feet. Nobody up there has ever seen it quite like that. So I checked the Long Range Prediction Center. You know what the Long Range Prediction Center is for the next year? For the winter here in Houston, warm and dry. For the spring, warm and dry. For the summer, exceptional heat and drought. Fall, warm and dry. So in other words, a year from now, it's going to look just like it did today, except there won't be any water left in our lake. I'll come back and give you a report on it if you'd like. But the part of the news that I always want to get is the weather forecast. Terry can tell you that. Just everything else, I want to know, what's going on, and I'd like to have an idea of what's coming. And a part of the weather forecast, as you know, is a statement about current conditions, temperature, wind. I'm one of the few people who cares about the wind currently, and also the wind that's going to come. The only people who really worry about the wind are people who ride bikes like I do. A 5 or 10 mile an hour wind for you when you're wandering around doesn't make much difference. But I'll tell you, a 5 mile an hour wind when you're pedaling into it, it's like a hurricane. So the weather predictions are important to me. Jesus makes an interesting connection between forecasting the weather and understanding the times we're living in. Oh, got to get this thing. Got to turn it on. That may not be the on one. There we go. This is what Jesus said. When you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say there will be rain, and it happens. When you see the south wind begin to blow, you say there will be scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the time. So what are the weather conditions in your life? That's kind of what I guess I would like to start today. What's happening in your, I'm not talking about, meteorologically speaking. I'm talking about in your soul, in your heart. What's today? Is it a partly cloudy day for you? Is it a sunny day? Is there a storm going on? Is something on your horizon? How about with your family? What are the current conditions? How about at work? What's life at work like for you these days? And broaden the picture a little bit more. Ask the question, so how are the weather conditions in your neighborhood, in your church, in your city, in your nation, in the world? What's going on? So we've been considering some of the storms that the Bible describes. They pop up from time to time in the Bible. First session, we talked about Elijah and the storm of anxiety. The next week, it was Jonah and the storm of disobedience. And the next week, it was Jesus' disciples and the storm of fear. And this week, I thought I'd try and summarize, wrap all that stuff up in this last session, talking about living faithfully in the midst of a storm. Now, this morning's storm story concerns Paul, perhaps the most famous and influential of all of Jesus' apostles, responsible for a significant amount of the New Testament. I can't remember where this was, but a number of years ago, there was some news magazine that came out talking about the most important people in history. And I was surprised to see that, at least according to this news magazine, Paul was described as the second or third most influential people in history, which is remarkable. If you look at the top 100 people, Paul is always on the list, and he's always in the first half of the list. And generally speaking, closer to the top than to the bottom. Until his conversion, he was the poster child Pharisee. This is what he had to say about himself. If anyone has any reason to be confident in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew among Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness under the law, blameless. Until his conversion, Paul was the chief persecutor and prosecutor against the followers of Jesus. But then after his supernatural conversion, he became the chief defender of Jesus Christ and his followers. Now, Paul got into trouble for a couple of reasons, and he spent 2, maybe 3 periods of time in prison. And his crime, according to the Jews, was that he taught that Jesus was, in fact, the one about whom Moses and the prophets and Abraham had prophesied. He's the Messiah, which was outside the frame of reference, at least, of the Jews in Jesus' day. His sin against the Romans was that he taught that Jesus was a king in opposition to the emperor. And according to both the Jews and to Rome, Paul committed the crime of saying that though he was a man crucified, dead, and buried, he was raised from the dead, and now he has established the reign of God and the kingdom of God. Those are not minor charges, by the way. I think he was being misunderstood, but I mean, this is really what's the word we would use? That's a word that's being used right now. It's sedition. The Cambridge Dictionary defines sedition as language or behavior intended to persuade other people to oppose their government and change it, sometimes by using force. It's not exactly what Paul was preaching, but it is what they were hearing. Now, for these crimes, Paul could have stood trial in Jerusalem, or he had the option of Rome because he was a Roman citizen. Partly, he chose Jerusalem, or he chose Rome for his trial, because he knew he just needed a change of venue. There's no way he's going to get a fair hearing in Jerusalem. Too many voices against him. So he opts for Rome, partly because he thought it would be to his advantage, but mostly because Jesus had appeared to him and said, I'm going to send you to declare the gospel to the emperor, which is really, when you think about it, quite amazing. I mean, after Paul's conversion as a young man, a young adult, his teaching ministry lasted for about 35 years. In that time, this obscure, the most we can say about Jesus, this obscure man who started this tiny movement in a part of the world that was far from the power centers of Rome, had somehow expanded in influence enough that now his name and his gospel are being declared to the emperor. I mean, that in itself is a remarkable story. But for that to happen, Paul, he had to get to Rome from Jerusalem. Now, there were 2 choices. He could go by land, 2,511 miles, 2,511 miles. That's a long way. I mean, I did a little bit of calculation on this. Let's just say, we like to think we can walk at 4 miles an hour, but if you really do walk 4 miles an hour, it's hard to keep that pace up. So let's just say 3 miles an hour. I tried to do a little calculation on that, sort of a rough estimate, figuring the number of hours a day you could walk, et cetera, taking time off for the Sabbath, so on and so forth. It would have taken at least 3 months of steady walking. I mean, it's the same as the distance from New York City to Seattle. Imagine walking from New York to Seattle. Well, that was to be his journey if he was to go by land. And there were all sorts of dangers planted along the way. Now, the other option was to go by sea. It was a lot faster, it was a lot safer, and it was a lot closer. By sea, it's roughly half the distance as by land, about 1,200 miles. And just figuring, the speed of a ship and that you don't have to stop for dinner and et cetera, would have taken much less time. So it's safer and faster to go by water. All right, safer and faster, but only during the shipping season. Mediterranean is not a place you wanted to be in one of these Roman boats in the winter during a storm. So when they determined to start, it was well past the safe zone for Mediterranean shipping. The captain of the boat and the centurion who was in charge of prisoners. This boat had a combination of prisoners on their way to Rome and also cargo. And the two of them agreed that they could probably make it if they sailed just then. Now, Paul warned them. He said, it's not going to work out. Won't be safe. So on his trip before the emperor, Paul's ship was caught in a terrible storm. The storm went on for a couple of weeks. Acts 27 describes it. It's had been defined by some as one of the great descriptions of a storm in ancient literature. So I'll just read through this to give you a certain feel for it. This is from the Acts of the Apostles. When a moderate south wind began to blow, they thought they could achieve their purpose, so they weighed anchor and began to sail past Crete, close to the shore. But soon a violent wind called a nor'easter rushed down from Crete. Since the ship was caught and could not be turned with its head to the wind, we gave way to it and we were driven. By running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we scarcely were able to get the ship's boat under control. After hoisting it up, they took measures to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor, and so they were driven. We were being pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard, and on the third day, with their own hands, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest raged, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. This little section gives, I think, some insights on how to manage yourself in the midst of stormy weather. So, when a moderate south wind began to blow, this phrase just caught my attention. They thought they could achieve their purpose. They thought they could do it. But life doesn't always go as planned. Sometimes, we make decisions that are based on the best information we have at hand. But sometimes we make decisions unwisely. Sometimes we make decisions that bring storms on us. Sometimes we find ourselves in storms that are because of someone else's decision making. Sometimes storms just come. So first of all, never be surprised by a storm. They thought they could make it. They weren't sure, but they thought they could. I mean, does any child not have this as one of their favorite books growing up? All right. I think I can. That was a centurion and the captain of the boat. And you can, except when you can't. When you misjudge your circumstance, don't be surprised if you end up in a storm. Now, sometimes thinking you can holds the possibility of success. I was thinking of a few great successes. It's been 50 years plus since we landed on the moon. Many of you may remember exactly where you were at that time. Terry and I had just been married. I have a clear recollection of that. And the more I hear about it now, the more I understand what an amazing, heroic adventure that was for them to get there, to the moon. I mean, based on the technology we have now, it's enough of a miracle. Back then, it was so rudimentary. It's astonishing that they made it. But they put their shoulder to it. John Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. And I think I can. It happened. I'm sort of thinking about Christopher Columbus sailing in the boats. I think I can. Some of you, maybe some of you in this room are running for office. We're in the political season. I'm exhausted by the advertising. I don't know about you. Can you believe anything that's in the advertisements anymore? It all seems so hypersensitized and all the rest. But nevertheless, my hat's off to people who decide to run for office. Public office is plays an important role. And I don't think anybody would run for office if they weren't thinking to themselves, I think I can. Came across this one. Leonid Rogozov? Leonid Rogozov. Can't ever get that night. Anyway, he was part of a Soviet exploration group. Soviet, I say, because it was the 1960s. And they established a base somewhere near in the region of Antarctica, and they were going to spend the winter there. Now, once winter starts, there's no rescuing them. If they have a problem, no one can come to help them. And so they try to make sure that they had all the things that they would likely need, including a doctor. But what happens when the doctor gets sick? I mean, what happens when the doctor's appendix burst? Yeah, that's life and death. So what did Leonid do? He operated on himself. Can you imagine that? He took out his own appendix. Let's see, I think I can. But sometimes thinking you can also holds the assurance of failure. Drinking and driving. I think every drunk gets in the car thinking, I think I can. Terry and I were driving down here the last Sunday, coming to speak here in this class. And about 1960, coming down on US 59, we were passed by a drunk. I mean, we've probably been passed by lots of drunks, but this was the most obvious drunk I've ever seen. It was absolutely, it's a good thing it was Sunday morning because there wasn't much traffic. This person was all over the road. It alarmed us so much that Terry got on the phone, called 911 and tried to give indications of where they could find this guy. Later in the day, I checked the news reports to see if there was some accident reported down there because it was just so obvious. Ponzi schemes, we mentioned that. That whole weird thing that Bernie Madoff and others have tried. There is just no way that can work. From the first day you start, it can't work. You get a bunch of people to believe that you have exceptional abilities in investing. And so you get them to give you a lot of money. Then you get another group of people and convince them, and you take the money from the second group to give it to the first group to prove what you're saying. Then you have to get another group, the third group, to do the same for the second and the first and fourth. And, so it goes down the line. But there is no way. From the beginning, sooner or later, it's destined to fail. I mean, having a marital affair, how can that possibly work? What are you thinking? There are just things that you may think you can, but they're destined for failure. We talked about the 737 MAX. And it's interesting to me, they described those two airplane crashes because Boeing, even though they knew there was something wrong, we think we can. 346 souls. It's interesting, whenever they refer to people who die in a shipwreck or an airplane accident, it's souls they refer to. Interesting, 346 souls. So despite Paul's warnings, they took off. And all the technology, all the experience, all their skill, all their possessions couldn't save them. So when you find yourself in a worst case scenario, accept your losses and move on. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and thereby avoided the damage and loss. I urge you now to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship." That makes me laugh every time. Things are going to be fine, but the ship's going to sink. So it was Paul's way of saying we have to accept what was done and then move on. Our kids introduced us a couple of weeks ago to one of those, I guess you would call it a reality series called Alone. Have you seen it? No. Hardly anybody knows about this show, but it's so interesting. They take 10 people who are somewhat skilled with survival skills, and they take them to remote places, 10 people, and they give them just the most minimal equipment. Maybe a handsaw and a hatchet and a pot and a tarp and some rain gear and a sleeping bag. And the one who can survive the longest wins $500,000. It's become so popular, as a matter of fact, that now they've raised it. If you survive, you win $1 million. Well, we watched one little segment, the only segment that we could find on Netflix. It was just so interesting. It's so interesting to see. I mean, what would you do first? You watch the show for a while, you realize the number one thing you need is water. That's not terribly difficult in the places where they put these people. It's a lot of water. The second thing you need to find early on is food. You've got to have food. And it turns out finding food is the most difficult part of this survival thing. Many of them, because I think it was just easier, began working on their shelter. Now, you would think that a shelter would be important. Winter is coming. This is cold climate. Winter is coming. There are bears, another interesting challenge. One woman actually dug a hole in the ground. But, doing that uses a lot of calories. You've got to find food. And every one of these people, well, they were all given one other thing. They were also given a satellite telephone. When they had had enough, when they said, I can't do this, then they could, the saying was, they could tap out. Get on the satellite phone, tap out. So one by one, they would begin to fall. Every one of them at some point was reduced to tears by the challenge of this. How do you survive? It's also interesting, every one of them, before they left, you could tell they'd figured out how they were going to spend the $500,000. It was like they'd already earned it. And one by one, they had to give up on it. They just had to let it go. Not going to be the $500,000. The thing that brought them back was food and loneliness. It just became intensely lonely for people that they love. Now, the man, what was his name? Clay, I think. He survived 75 days. That's the longest any one of them ever did. But at some point, they had to let go of that prize and just get on with life. Come to terms with that moment. Tap out, and move on. It's kind of a classic Stephen Glenn moment. I like Stephen Glenn. He has these three things that he always asks when he's in a crisis. First of all, what happened? Secondly, what did you learn? Thirdly, what will you do next time? These three questions can be a great help if somebody in your life's going through an issue. Sometimes, it's actually surprisingly difficult to figure out what happened. We have all sorts of defensive mechanisms in our head that prevent us from saying, okay, this is what happened. But find out what happened and then find out what you learned from it and then apply it next time. So what will you do next time always gives a positive spin to things. Okay, so one thing you can do is to reevaluate your life in a storm and your priorities. Second thing, let your storm rearrange your value system. Remember that old story about the thieves who broke into a department store? They didn't take anything, they just rearranged all the price tags. You come in the next day and, wow, I have no idea. But a storm has a way of rearranging the price tags in your life. Only the ship will be lost. That's no small matter, but you're still alive. I think I hear people saying that in the Ukraine, don't they? It's the country. It's just infuriating. That country's being destroyed, especially on the eastern side. But the people still say, we're still alive. Think about the same thing in Florida and as a result of Ian. Our daughter Angie and her husband Josh and their two kids, they were among those who were flooded out in Harvey. Same with, I don't know how many of you. So they come knocking on our front door at like 9 o'clock on that fateful morning. Somebody rescued them in a boat, driven them to our house. They were there with the clothes on their back. That was it. By 11 o'clock, we had gone to rent a car. It's a good thing we got after that right away because, cars were impossible to find. And by noon, we had walked back, we meaning me and Josh and Angie, we had walked back to their house in water that was about waist deep. Obviously, none of us will ever forget what it was like to walk in the back door of their house and see everything floating. And to feel when you're walking along, the hardwood floors have become separated, and they're now, when you put your foot down, you're pushing the hardwood floor down. They went there thinking, well, we'll salvage what we can. Well, they lost everything. They had to strip the house down to the studs, both outside and inside, try to put it back together again. But the thing they were most worried about was Angie kept her wedding ring on the dresser. Get into that bedroom, get that wedding ring. But the dresser had turned over, and it was down there in the darkness and the muck. All of a sudden, everything else might have been lost. Got to find that ring. And fortunately, a little bit later, they did. Storms will do you a favor by forcing you to decide what matters and what doesn't matter in life. And this is true with your health. A storm in your health will make you reassess. A storm at work, a storm in relationships, in your possessions. Jesus said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not consume and thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. All right, third thing, reset the narrative of your life. I don't know. I get a little bit weary of the narrative. Does that sound to you like one of those trendy words? It feels kind of trendy to me. I'm aware, I don't know why, I'm sort of hypersensitive to trendy words like iconic or everything's curated now. I don't know. But that's my problem. All right, reset your narrative. For last night there stood by me an angel of the God to whom I belong. Isn't that nice? The God to whom I belong, and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before the emperor, and indeed God has granted safety to all those who are sailing with you. An angel. Came across this, didn't show up very well. Maybe it's better. Yeah, it's a little better up there. I just love that painting. You see how the angel comes out of light at the top of it, striking down in the storm. We took a group of 55 people to the Oberammergau Passion Play in September. It's going to happen again in 8 years. If you have a chance, I sure hope you go. It's a remarkable experience. But as part of this is the story of the last week of Jesus' life, and I can't give you any details of it except that half the people of the town of 5,000 of Oberammergau play one role or another in this thing. They have 5 performances a week from the 1st of May to the 1st of October, roughly. Sold out years in advance in an auditorium seats 4,500, 5,000 people. Anyway, you get toward the middle of the last week of Jesus' life as it's being acted out on the stage. And the first time we went, which is 2010, I've noticed from time to time, just almost over in the wings, there would be someone dressed in white, just watching. Arms crossed. Then this time, a little each time they do this every 10 years. So this version of it was a little bit different. This man in white came out, getting toward the really critical moments in Jesus' trial, and this person sits cross-legged at the very front of the stage, and lights a fire and is just standing there warming his hands by the fire. While all these things, Jesus' judgment and crucifixion, are going on in the background, I finally figured out that's the angel. There is an angel in every storm. Angel in your storm. You know what I'm really referring to here is the meta-narrative. It's the story that surrounds the story of your life. And maybe I can describe it best, at least the way that it makes most sense to me, to be reminded of Jacob. I remember Jacob was one of the greatest figures in the Old Testament. But he had the most dysfunctional family maybe in the Old Testament. And he was a significant part of the dysfunction, and yet somehow he'd been chosen by God. You get to a point in Jacob's life where everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. He's in the wilderness. He's distraught. He knows his brother is coming the next day. He's going to have it out with his brother. It's going to be bad. It's going to be rough. Oh, puts his head on a rock to go to sleep. He dreams. And you remember what God does, and he speaks to him in the dream and says, know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will not leave you until I've done all that I have promised, and I will bring you back to this land. And Jacob opened up his eyes and he said, surely the presence of the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. This is an awesome place. This is the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. That's the meta-narrative that I'm talking about. It's so important to know the meta-narrative, because your life and every person you will ever encounter are being significantly, primarily shaped by two forces. One is love and the other is by suffering. Either on the positive side or on the negative side. You can't find any religion that's not about those things. You can't find any person whose life has not somehow been influenced, for better or for worse, by love and suffering. These are the two universal paths for transformation. Every single person you ever meet will find this to be true. You know, Garrison Keillor, he said when he retired, he said, when you get to the end of life, you discover that there are no answers, there are only stories. Which, that bothered me a lot, because I'm an answer guy. And that's why you go to seminary, to get answers. That's why people come to their pastors, to get answers. What do you mean no answers, only stories? But I kind of come around to it now. I think I finally come to understand that every truth we hold to, we've gotten to because of a story in our life. If you can find the story that's behind the truth, the conviction that you have, it changes the way you relate to yourself and to other people. I was thinking about this in regard to Orlando Harris. He was that young man who took the rifle into that high school in St. Louis last week and started shooting. Did you see the note that they found in his car? Did you hear about the note that was left in his car? He said, I don't have any friends. I don't have any family. I've never had a girlfriend. I've never had a social life. I've been an isolated loner my entire life. This was, he said, the perfect storm for a mass shooter. What's the meta-narrative of that man's life? And what if he had known what Jacob knew? I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will not leave you. Bring you back to this land to restore you, provide your promise. Remember me telling you about Joe, the guy. I know I refer to Joe maybe too often, but it's been significant in my life. He's one of the panhandlers at the intersection of Silver and the Katy Freeway on the frontage road there, and I used to drive by him all the time. He'd sit there with his little sign that said, "Hi, I'm Joe." And about that time, I came across a statement in one old Jewish proverb that says, before every human being goes an angel announcing, behold the image of God. And I thought, I don't know, really touched me. The image of God, Joe, sitting right there. I thought, I should go make myself a big sign, about that big, and put the words on it. Behold the image of God, with an arrow pointing down right where Joe is sitting. So you've got Joe sitting there, hi, I'm Joe, and me with a placard pointing down the image of God. If you have that kind of person in your life, someone who can draw up that meta-narrative for you, man, I'm telling you, it changes everything. It makes it possible for you to live courageously. So keep up your courage, Paul said. For I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have told you. but we will have to run aground on some island. So, never be thrown off by the storms. I mean, if you think about it this way, what Paul is saying is, it's going to be great, but there is a matter of a shipwreck. You got to get through the shipwreck. First summer that I was, after I graduated from high school, I was away from home. I worked for a company that trimmed trees for the telephone company, so I worked with 2 other men, and we just lived out on the road. I was trimming trees on the Oregon coast, and I remember this just so vividly. I mean, I don't know when the first time was you were away from home, but it was impactful for me just to be living with 2 men. I mean, we had an onion eating contest one night, to give you an idea how that was like. They would get an onion like an apple and eat it. Well, anyway, one night I just walked out in Florence, Oregon, right on the coast, beautiful sand dunes. Anyway, I walked out on the sand dune, and I was standing beside, I think, probably the last tree between the United States and Hawaii. And all of a sudden, I just felt this presence. I don't know if you've had that experience before. It was so profound. Well, Terry and I had just started dating about a year or so before that, and things went well for a while, sort of had its ups and downs. I knew that I found my future mate. She didn't know that, but I knew it. In fact, she was pretty darn sure I was not her future mate. So what I didn't know was that, that was the first time really I'd experienced true love for someone who wasn't my parent or my sister. Well, what I didn't know in that relationship was that a storm was coming. And the storm was when she said to me, "I'm transferring to a different college. Don't follow me." I don't know, you could say, well, it's just, pardon? No, yeah, if I'd given up the onion habit, that would have been better, I guess. Huh? You could say, well, it's just a 19-year-old love thing. I don't know, it's always seemed more than that to me. It was just a significant experience in my life of the combination of love and suffering. What I didn't realize until later, in fact, in some ways it came to me just yesterday when I was working on this, the thing that got me through that was that through all of my life to that point, God had been creating a meta-narrative for me. And somehow I knew that God was saying, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will not leave you until all that I've done, all that I've promised, and I will bring you back to this land. I somehow knew surely the presence of the Lord was in this place, wherever the place was. Well, as it turned out, after a couple of years, one day we ran into each other. And that was, about 60 years ago. Jesus said to his disciples after they'd all made these great declarations about, we're going to be with you, we're never going to leave you. We think about that with Peter, but the other disciples said the same thing if you read in the Gospel of John. And Jesus said to his apostles, he said, all of you will abandon me, but I'm never alone because my Father is always with me. But I have told you these things so that you might have peace. In the world you face tribulation, but I have overcome the world. It's the meta-narrative. All right, so we're in the World Series stuff. This was from the American League Championship Series from, 2019, I think it was. Game 6, you might remember playing the Yankees. And we have a lead, we get to the 9th inning, and the Yankees tie up the game. That was just so deflating. It's the Yankees. Well, my friend Robert Zimmerman told me about this later on. He and his wife, Nancy, they can't watch the games in the same room with each other. They both just have such a different way of processing what's going on. So he watches on the TV and she listens on the radio in another room. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there's a delay on the TV. So that what happens on the radio happens before it happens on the television set. I could probably find a copy of this somewhere and play it for you right now, but you'll just have to use your imagination. Jose Altuve comes up. This is 2019. Everybody's deflated in the stands. It's the bottom of the ninth inning. It's the last chance. And what does Altuve do? It's a home run. Everybody goes crazy. Nancy comes out of the room where she's listening on the radio, and she says to Robert, who's watching it on TV, she says, "Something wonderful is about to happen." All right. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. So in your storm, just remember, I'm with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, so that you can say, in any storm, surely the presence of the Lord is in even this place. This is an awesome place. This is the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Please pray with me. Lord, I thank you for your faithfulness to each one of us. You have been everywhere we have ever been. Sometimes we had no idea you were there, but you are, this is just more than we can comprehend in our mind. You are with every single person, all 7.98 billion of us right now. I don't know how you can do that. The scriptures say you are. You are an awesome God beyond anything we can comprehend or imagine. And I pray that you will help us to keep in our mind, in the treasure chest of our heart, your promise to always be with us. And that will help us as well to spin up a new narrative for people around us whose lives might be falling apart. Grateful, Lord, for your presence with us in all things. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thanks very much for being here these 4 weeks. I've loved being with you.